This is part 5 of the Alchemist's Tomb, New England. Chapter 30, Detroit, Michigan, 1852. The city of Detroit had become a boom town. Each morning, Solomon Delhut looked out his windows. On the opposite bank of the Detroit River, the city had become more and more an eyesore. Knowing he'd have a busy day ahead of him across the river, he took his time savoring his coffee. The house was quiet, as only himself and Esther now lived there. His daughter Emily had married a businessman, and Pierre was sent to a private school in Albany in preparation for running the family empire. Granted, there was the household staff, but they didn't enter the house until it was time to prepare breakfast. The hired security patrolled the perimeter of the island. Thus, for a few more minutes, Solomon could be alone with his thoughts. He remembered the face of the scarred Indian, the only face without verified identity, who'd been called Jim. For a few years, his enemies had been true to their word. Solomon survived the intended massacre of his family by acting weak, and when William Drummond Stewart and Antoine Clement left, they fulfilled their oaths by hunting down the men responsible for the deaths of his French cousin, Berenger, as well as Joseph Nicolet. Yet the home invasion left Solomon Delhut a changed man. Now he had a plan. Crushing his enemies was an afterthought. Yes, he gave the names of the attackers to his more powerful friends, those who were also members of the Order of Eos. But revenge did not burn in his heart. He felt lucky to be alive. Cowering to the intruders had saved his family, but it also made him even more curious about his family legacy. He'd personally surrendered his ancient map, which, although no longer necessary, still burned in his gut. The other map, the Almaric map, had never been in his possession. He'd purchased it from Lady Margaret Drummond through his agent, Gerard Berenger. But both died in the July Revolution, and the map ended up in the hands of his enemies. Thanks to the soft hearts of his abductors, he managed to get some manner of revenge when Joel Poncet died suddenly from tuberculosis at his home in South Carolina. His map, the Abaran map, had been in the family for generations. From what he could discern, the map had been given to Etienne Delhut by Mrs. Pierre-Charles Lesueur in exchange for enough wealth to relocate her family to Louisiana to be with her Lemoyne cousins. Having studied the map for years, he knew the legend behind it. If the tale was to be believed, the wise King Solomon hired a large expedition, ships, sailors, navigators, soldiers, engineers, and miners, to search the world for the Philosopher's Stone. Solomon gave the leader of the venture, a Hebrew named Abaran, his complete research in the form of the Almaric map. Both maps were a few thousand years old now, but both had been made within a few years of each other. King Solomon's Almaric map, which Lady Drummond tried to sell, used stars as references for the expedition. The Abaran map, ugly and crude, was drawn after the explorers traveled deep into the heart of an unknown continent. The survivors tried to describe the place where the waters flow in all direction, noted by its blue earth. For thousands of years, the map of a failed expedition remained in a vault until the Knights of the Temple of Solomon discovered it beneath the ruins in the temple in Jerusalem. In 1188, at the splitting of the Elm, one ancient map was given to the Order of Eos, and the other was given to the Priory of Ormus. While the Order of Eos kept their map secure for the next few centuries, the Priory of Ormus ended up losing the Abaran map to the Jesuits in the 1605 during the chaos of the Gunpowder Plot. A century later, the Order of Eos lost the Almaric map when Edward Drummond, later known as the Pirate Blackbeard, stole it from the Templar Guardians and brought it to Scotland, where it remained in Logelmond for another century. But what good did the maps do anybody? Joseph Nicolet saw the Almaric map before it was stolen by Joel Poncet, and he went right to the heart of Minnesota Territory, which he called Undine, the Blue Woman, in the place where water flows in all directions. He didn't find anything. Rumors insisted that the Philosopher's Stone had been lost near Bermuda, tossed into the sea by a spiteful Pierre-Charles Le Sueur. The blue ormus, or vitriol, left behind in southern Minnesota, had almost entirely been washed away or removed. The Sinclairs insisted that Nicolette and Le Sueur had either lied or been wrong, and they modified the legends to match the Missouri River, meaning the resting place of the Philosopher's Stone is hidden deep in the tributaries of the Rocky Mountains. But where was Nicolette planning to travel next before he died? Delhut wondered. No one could explain it to him, although EOS investigators insisted that if Nicolette had lived, he was heading out into the Rockies to join up with his allies, DeSmet, Stewart, Geyer, Clement, and Fremont. While everyone else focused westward, Solomon focused on the early expeditions of Nicolette. Even though the Chippewa still held the north and the Dakota still held the south, their strength was diminished. The state of Minnesota was opening to settlement thanks to treaties. With a shell company in Albany, Solomon Delhut planned to buy up the land north of Little Falls, where Nicolette and his Chippewa guide Shagobay found blue earth at a place haunted by a water spirit. Once I take possession of the land, I'll have all the time I need to privately explore my theories. Nicolette had scoured the haystack for him and had shown him where the needle should be found. Now all he needed to do was a little digging. Having finished his coffee, Solomon Delhut stood up and walked downstairs. Outside, his staff prepared for his departure. He ate breakfast with his wife, chatted about the house staff about the news, and met the carriage driver for his short trip to Detroit. Belle Island had once been the home of the Anishinaabe people on their westward migration, referred to as the Seven Fires. After leaving the shores of the Atlantic, the Anishinaabe followed prophecy and providence to Montreal Island and Niagara Falls, before a young hunter found the sacred Migi shells that identified the third stopping place, Round Lake. Round Lake later became known as Lake St. Clair, the village became known as Detroit, and the island became known as Belle Island. Fur traders understood the strategic location between two Great Lakes, and civilization took root long after the Anishinaabe inhabited Minnesota. My son shall have a bridge, Solomon mused as he waited in the carriage for the ferry. The others teased him about his remote home, but more than ever, he loved the symbolism of living on one of the 7 islands. While the rest of Wanagi-Wagama turned into urban sprawl, Belle Island remained wooded. The past quickly met the future at his offices of North Star Roads. He left Montreal 2 decades earlier to expand his father's lumber empire, but in the city of Detroit, he discovered that while he could make money building the corduroy roads of logs, a more permanent solution was needed. Detroit needed metal, and with its place at the crossroads of the Great Lakes, he privately began to invest in the acquisition and distribution of metal along the Great Lakes corridor. His chain link fence business was a boom for the citizens of the growing city, and with the West opening up, rumors of vast sources of metal along the shores of Lake Superior would hopefully transform North Star Roads into a business empire. The men waiting in his office, however, were not any of his business partners from any of his budding enterprises. Duncan Dobie, Callum Gunn, and Lachlan Morrison sat, chatting pleasantly, upon the couches as Solomon Delhut walked up to them, loyal EOS men. Welcome, gentlemen. I hope I haven't kept you waiting long. We arrived last night, Callum Gunn explained, and we didn't want to bother you so late. Duncan and I were conversing about the land purchases in Makata County. Yes, Sibley has assured us that we'll be first in line, Solomon bragged. Now that Wisconsin has achieved statehood, the Minnesota territory is still in the process of being organized, but our interests will supersede all other claims. Makata, Morrison repeated. Seeing Lachlan Morrison sent a chill down his spine. That man had a reputation as an enforcer, a killer, unlike the 2 Albany businessmen who joined him. Makata is a Sioux word for blue earth. From what we've gleaned from Joseph Nicolet's 4 expeditions, His initial interest was near the headwaters of the Mississippi River. Apparently, he visited a place called Spirit Lake, where there were strange blue vitriol found near a cave. Ah, Morrison feigned understanding. The other two waited patiently for Morrison to say anything. Although Gunn and Dobie had a higher financial status, they understood Morrison's place within the ranks of EOS. What about our interest in the headwaters of the Missouri? Delhut nodded. Certainly a possibility. Makata County, Morrison repeated. Perhaps a bit too assuming? I understand why we're purchasing land, but should we be calling it that? It's just another native word. Morrison sighed with disdain. What's the matter? Clearly, only Morrison knew the answer, and he took his time thinking about it. 4 men are dead in the Orkney Islands. All Sinclairs. Shit. Stewart? Likely. He and his entire entourage vanished a few days before it happened. We're not as concerned about Stewart as we are about those affiliated with Joel Ponset. Ponset? We didn't have anything to do with his death. You gave Stewart information that led to him, and those who supported Ponset wanted retribution, which led to Stewart and Clement's names being distributed amongst guilds that specialize in assassination. Some guild, apparently they failed. Yes, but the death of Joel Ponset has not only woken the sleeping bear, but has also given it fresh taste of blood. Your name has been distributed within the same guilds, Morrison explained. Me? Morrison looked down at the piece of paper. Solomon Delhut, William Sinclair, Edouard Tarrant. Notice any connections? All 3 Grand Masters. With Stewart and the others, it had been mindless vengeance over the death of Nicolette, but Vendita meant to exterminate the entire order. Does this have to do with... Morrison nodded. So it has been decided that the 3 of you are about to go on an unexpected extended holiday until we can get to the bottom of it. I'll be traveling with you to make sure you properly vanish. Mr. Gunn will oversee your business affairs here in Detroit, and Mr. Dobie will make sure your plans for Makata County in Minnesota continue as you desire. Most likely, you'll be back within a month. A month? The immediate anger Solomon Delhut felt turned into an icy chill as he thought about the scarred Indian holding a blade to his son Pierre. If it's war they want, it's war they'll get. Yet he knew for now he'd need to disappear. Chapter 31. Boston, Massachusetts, 1852. For the better part of 3 months, Lewis Carnes played the part of Lord Wesley Erskine. Having arrived in winter, the 5 travelers lingered in a rented house outside of Boston while waiting for spring weather. After weeks of living off Stewart's money, today they finally emerged from hiding. Carnes waited patiently for his valet and the 2 footmen to finish transferring the luggage from house to coach. Beside him, his guide previewed the itinerary, but there were too many names and too many obscure connections for him to follow. He'd seen pompous noblemen just stand and nod, so he did the same thing in his role of Lord Erskine. Now even locals doted on him. 40 years earlier, at the Battle of Waterloo, he expected to die any second, so the idea of living to be an old man, pampered by others, put a smile on his face. You can wait inside of the front carriage, Antoine told him with a meek gesture. We'll finish loading the luggage and the 3 of us will ride there. Of course, Erskine said. Professor Morgan continued talking into his ear as they stepped into the carriage. Despite playing the part of haughty Lord Erskine, Lewis was frightened. He knew the names of the men associated with the Order of Eos, and after 200 years in North America, they'd all taken root and thrived, finding independence from any royal family or government in Europe. Now, Lewis mostly feared for his friend William, yet their relationship began with open hatred. William Drummond Stuart's wealth gave him military command, but the men belonged to Sergeant Carnes, who did everything he could to privately belittle the boy in charge. Although only a few years Stuart senior, Lewis mocked Stuart to the men and challenged him when making decisions, only to find out the man was made of steel. During war, his view of Stuart changed. Not only was he right most of the time, but he also had good luck. "We're loaded, sir," Antoine Clement announced with a twinkle in his eye. Back in Scandinavia, Professor Morgan had been allowed his research trip, but now the real men would take the reins. The rest of the day consisted of playing the part of Erskine for a day at the Hotel Pelham. After unpacking the luggage, Carnes collapsed onto his big bed while the others made plans for the week-long stay in Boston to prepare for the next stage of the journey. Following his nap, Carnes walked to the window to look out upon the city. For America, it was considered an old town, but compared to the cities of Europe, everything about Boston looked fresh and new. Below him, the busy streets of Boylston and Tremont allowed Professor Morgan, Antoine Clement, and the boys to come and go with little notice, but he had to remain visible at all times, which is fine by me. He rotated his servants. At breakfast, Professor Morgan was at his side. At lunch, either Nielsen or Forsberg sat with him in the smoking room while he read various newspapers. Although Clement offered other solutions, they decided to keep Sophus Nielsen as a hired footman rather than risk him sharing details about what he'd learned during the crossing of the Atlantic. For supper, Antoine Clement would put on his 8-button jacket and stiff-collared dress shirt and hung at his elbow as fellow travelers shared stories with Lord Erskine. William Drummond Stuart's plan required patience and allowed Carnes to live in the lap of luxury as they created a false narrative for whoever watched them. While waiting for spring, Carnes created a list, the leadership for the Order of Eos. Clement explained the roles played by the Sinclairs, Solomon Delhut, and Edouard Tarrant, while Morgan explained the historical details of the families. Carnes knew why William Drummond Stuart had been denied membership. Drinking, hunting, whoring, gambling, bragging, these traits made the young nobleman too risky to be privy to the secrets of the ancient society. But Stuart's exotic uncle trusted him enough to leave his guard down. Spurned by Eos, Stuart spent the summer after Waterloo campaign scouring the library at Lough Geelmond. Although it didn't take him long to discover that Eos was searching for a lost treasure on the continent of North America. Following the death of his aunt, Eos took back most of their relics from the Drummond family, but not before Lady Margaret tried to sell a map to an interested buyer from North America. That was when Sergeant Carnes joined the story. What began as a simple murder investigation led to an investigation of 2 names, Jean-Nicolas Nicolet and Gerard Berenger. While the astronomy professor proved to be a dead end, Lady Margaret had met him to drive up the price, the merchant Berenger had connections to several secret societies. Just days into the murder investigation of Lady Drummond, the July Revolution shook France. Suddenly, rioters with connections to the Illuminati, Carbonari, and countless Masonic lodges flooded Paris. In the chaos, Berenger was murdered and Nicolet vanished. Carnes reported all of this to Stuart, who then took it upon himself to go to North America to see if there was any truth in the old legends involving the Philosopher's Stone. Several years later, Stuart returned with Antoine Clement and many answers. Lady Margaret ironically bound Nicolet and Stuart together for a common cause, but the bold scientist died before his grand plan could be completed. Now, Sergeant Louis Carnes prepared to repay Captain Stuart for the extra 4 decades of life he'd been given. The plan was threefold. For Professor Morgan, it was investigating Eos in order to discern fact and fiction. For Antoine Clement, it was vengeance against the men who had his father killed. For Carnes, it was to find Nicolet's remaining allies on the frontier. and then extract the Philosopher's Stone. But first, vengeance for Clement and Thomas. To do that, he had to put away the character of Lord Erskine after parading around Boston for a full week. He changed out of his expensive clothes back into simple clothing more suited for clandestine work. Soon the others assembled in his room for the moment. Professor Morgan will stay here with the boys, Clement explained. Our passage to Hudson Bay won't depart for another week, which will allow us time to complete the side mission. I take it I'll be under the weather for a few days? Carnes asked, already knowing the plans for the first 3 assassinations. You'll be bedridden by stomach flu. The boys will fetch soups and basic remedies while Professor Morgan will linger in the lobby to avoid catching it, Clement added. It's not a short trip to Nova Scotia, Carnes added. Are you sure you find reliable passage there and back again? It's reliable, but not glamorous. There's a fishing ship that hauls Halifax mackerel to Boston and then fills up with Boston cod to be transported to England. It makes the trek every 2 days without fail. That gives us 2 days there, 2 days to scout, and 2 days to return, right on schedule to depart. That'll do, Carnes answered. Are you sure about this? Once we begin, we go all the way. I'm prepared to go all the way. Are you? Later that night, Louis Carnes slipped out of Lord Wesley Erskine's window to meet Antoine Clement in the alley. From there, they passed through the dark streets until they found their way to the docks. By the time the sun rose, Carnes looked back to see Boston in distant Massachusetts Bay. Clement was more surly than normal. Had they been able to come directly to Boston from Scotland, they would have had the element of surprise. Like with hunting, when the prey was spooked, it took time before it returned and relaxed. Clement assumed the trip to Nova Scotia would be fruitless, so Carnes found a quiet corner of the steamer to properly clean his rifle and reflect on the men he was about to help Clement kill. Numerous men played the part in the murder of Antoine Clement Sr., but Magnus Sinclair's name was at the top of the list. Carnes knew the biography by heart. Descended from a line of Sinclairs that traced their roots all the way back to the Orkney Islands, the Canadian Sinclairs took root 2 centuries ago, surviving wars involving the Micmac, Acadians, French, British, and Americans to call Nova Scotia their home. 2 days later, they stepped off the mackerel ship and onto the shore of Nova Scotia. After studying Nova Scotia for so long, Carnes found it almost disappointing. The pines were pleasant, the shores were scenic, the air was inviting. Halifax was filled with regular-looking gents who went about their business with a friendly nod. Rather than finding a ride, the men vanished into the woods to walk the 30 miles in isolation. By evening, they hid in the trees overlooking the Sinclair estate. Both Carnes and Clement had looking glasses to watch the mansion with their ready rifles at their side. The 3-story stone mansion had 4 rooms with windows on the top floor, another 4 rooms with 7 windows on the main floor, and another 4 windows and doors on the ground level. None of them lit up at supper. The house is empty. Antoine Clement seethed though his face remained passive as always. Carnes noticed how Clement held onto his breath as he thought, releasing it in angry bursts. I see something, Clement finally said. What? Where? Carnes asked, putting aside his own looking glass down to see where Clement focused. On the island. The estate of Magnus Sinclair sat near the shore of Mahone Bay, which connected directly to the open Atlantic Ocean. Several acres of pines had been felled in order to create lush yards and to also open the shoreline to view the beautiful island behind it. On the island, Carnes saw 2 lanterns and a campfire. This is all Sinclair property, Clement insisted. If they knew someone were coming, they might have fled to the island for protection. Or else they're on vacation and it's a couple local boys out exploring. Go check the house, Clement ordered. I'll watch from here. I'll cover you and keep an eye on those lights on the island. If you don't find anything, we're going to the island. Carnes left the cover of the woods, hunched slightly, and approached the dark house. All the windows remained open without curtains drawn. His head pivoted, knowing that open windows would allow light to be seen if thieves risked a light. Someone could be watching me right now. He peeked and poked around the windows, his rifle strapped to his back and his revolver now in hand. The doors were locked, and around the perimeter of the house everything was tucked away and in order. Sinclair is gone, Carnes decided, but he knew there'd be plenty of opportunity to kill their enemies on the next stage of the journey. Once he got around to the bay side of the house, he could see the lanterns much better. No more than 200 yards separated the shore from the island, and in the woods of the island, the lanterns continued to move away from the campfire. On the edge of the water, he saw a boat. Clement might be right. A figure moved in the shadows of the campfire, and Carnes flinched so hard he almost squeezed the trigger. Luckily, he didn't. Clement came around the corner, pointing to the nearest shore. There are several small boats tied up in the little bay, he said, referencing them out of the hill. We're going to get some answers. Chapter 32. Oak Island, Nova Scotia, 1853. Antoine Clement held his rifle as if reuniting with an old lover. His Manton rifle had been given to him by Lord Stuart years earlier during an expedition. From its silver sight at the end of the barrel to the brass embossed plate at the hilt, he knew every inch of the gun. Back at Mirthley Castle, he'd reunited with her, firing off enough rounds to adjust accuracy, but it had been months since that moment. He pointed the silver sight to the campfire, letting the glow of the fire turn his aim to a shadowy frame. The first shot was the most important. He needed to give Carnes a fighting chance by taking out the first target. Beside Clement, another lover waited should Carnes fail. His brand new Sharps rifle had been another gift from Stuart. Although the new silver rifle proved more accurate at the shooting range, he didn't trust it when it mattered most. The lantern began returning to the camp. Looking side-eye, he could see the figures approaching, while his rifle remained pointed at the kill zone. Near the fire, the two targets would be almost blind to the darkness, while Clement could clearly see their figures in the glow of the fire and lantern. If Carnes did his part, he'd be hiding behind the big oak tree to confront the two. Once the signal was given, Clement would fire. Oak trees. The island was indeed strange. While walking from the port at Halifax to Mahone Bay, Clement saw the composition of the forest and fauna, but instead of pine trees, old oak trees, the species he'd not seen during the 40 miles they traveled by foot, covered the island. To make it easier to spot from the sea, Morgan had explained back at Boston. 100 islands surrounded this stretch of Nova Scotia shore, and from a distance, it looked no different than the others, but up close, the difference was obvious. Bloody hell. The two figures that appeared at the campfire were boys. Sensing a trap, Clement immediately looked over his shoulder. The small oak forest remained silent. He turned back to the boys. Trespassers? The campsite was littered with luxury items reminiscent of how Joseph Nicollet camped during the 1836 expedition to the Mississippi River headwaters, more personal items than survival items. No, this is the campsite of boys and not security guards. But who are these boys? Clement kept his rifle sights on the boys on the edge of the camp. The rowboat meant the boys still had an umbilical cord to the world, but the design of the camp indicated they'd been staying there for quite a while. Were they abandoned, or did they choose to stay? Like the clueless boy in his aim, Clement had spent plenty of time abandoned by his father. For months at a time, his father would vanish into the Canadian wilderness, only to walk into camp like a mythical hero. Raised by grandmothers, wives, and daughters, he grew to idolize the great hairy beasts, especially his father, who would appear for a few days a year to rut and tell tales. Between these random sightings, young Antoine honed his hunting skills until he proved his worth to leave camp, and he never looked back. Carnes boldly stepped into a camp in much the same way his father had done, with pistols drawn. He spoke softly enough that neither boy so much as flinched when he appeared. He towered over them just as they had taken a seat. "Give the signal, Lewis. These people killed my father." Carnes kept yapping, and soon the boys began yapping right back. They sat on their hands while at Carnes' command, and the wide-eyed boys nodded and spoke with enthusiasm at each and every question. "Damn it, we're here for slaughter, not small talk." Clement felt the curve of his finger touch the cold metal of the trigger as he debated taking the first shot. During his 2 decades on the frontier, he'd taken thousands of lives. His killing habits worked right up the food chain. Small animals around camp, the Hudson Bay polar bear that impressed his father, the countless deer, elk, and bison out on the frontier, enemies that threatened Stuart's hunting party, and any Mexican soldier within range of his rifle. Why not add 2 more to the heap? Carnes stepped between Clement and the boys, on purpose. Clement lowered the hammer on the Manton and then pulled the shoulder strap around his neck as he stood. He picked up the sharp and did the same, crisscrossing the rifles to rest squarely on his back. His fingers found his hunting knife. Out in the darkness he advanced, taking heavy, confident strides just like that polar bear that planned on his juicy meal. First, Louis Carnes grew wide-eyed and then stepped back in alarm. Then the boys saw him and cowered even closer to the ground. When Clement took hold of the nearest by the hair, a bleat of terror came from the boy's throat, which would have been ended by the edge of a boot struck Clement in the hip, sending him and the boy toppling to the ground. The hunting knife struck the ground, twisting in his fingers as his forearm took the brunt of the fall. By the time Clement found the blade, Carnes had pointed a pistol in his face. "We're not killing children," the former sergeant snapped. "Is this how your sorry tale of revenge ends?" "The old bear still has a little bit of growl in him," Clement decided. His fingers tightened on the hilt of the knife as he reached for the boy again. Carnes' thumb moved to pull the hammer back. "Don't test me." Strangely enough, Carnes' left hand remained pointed at the other boy, who still sat on his hands in submission. The right pistol did not waver. How many men did Carnes kill in the war? Clement knew the story of the Battle of Hougoumont from Stuart's repeated tellings, and aside from knowing the Scotsman's role, he never pictured the sergeant's role in the bloodbath. Fuck. Clement let go of the knife and raised his hand in submission. "Scoot away from the poor kid," Carnes insisted, gesturing with his cocked pistol. "These boys are not the innocent lambs you believe them to be," Clement said, feeling the shoulder straps choking him until he rose to his knees. He brushed himself off. "Only time will tell, but for now, I'll not have their blood on my hands, or yours." Clement thought about how they'd spared Solomon Delhut because of the children, and because of that mercy, assassins learned their names. "Damn it all. Why do you think we came all this way? Walk away if you don't have the stomach for it." "I have no qualms shedding blood, but I'd leave your dead body right beside theirs if it suited my purpose. But then again, I'm not a bloodthirsty savage bent on revenge." "Savage?" Clement repeated. "Does he want it to end here on this island? Look at yourself." Clement let go of the boy's hair, but the child did not so much as move, whimpering with each breath. "If we let them live, matters will be worse. Trust me. We should show them no mercy." "How do you know they're not just a couple local boys seeking adventure on the island?" Carnes asked. "Now sheath your blade and step back." "Local boys?" Clement felt the fires of rage lessen and the sharp pain of mortality pierce his mind. He picked up the blade and shoved it into its sheath. He raised both hands to show Carnes he'd forgiven the kick. He rose slowly, his rifles clattering on his back. "My apologies." Now, are you going to show the restraint of a civilized human being? Clement nodded. Then as a reasonable human being, you understand these are not the men responsible for the death of your father. Yes. Before you came crashing in, we were having a very interesting conversation. Do you know what they were doing? Tell them, boys. The two boys hesitated, glancing at each other. He saw then that neither had sprouted and were only perhaps boys of 10 or 11. Boys, Carnes pressed. The older boy answered. We were searching for Captain Kidd's lost treasure. Treasure hunters, Carnes repeated, glancing at Clement. So then I asked them if they were trespassing. What do you boys say? Are you trespassing? Both boys shook their heads. And why aren't you trespassing? The older boy answered again. Because the island belongs to my uncle? Carnes nodded. And then I asked, where's your uncle? Do you know what they told me? They're both Sinclairs. I know it. He said that the whole family packed up for a vacation, unexpectedly. Grandma, the uncles, the cousins, all of them. So I asked why they were left behind, but that's about the time you came crashing in, frightening the boys. Now, why don't you go lean against a tree so the boys and I can finish our conversation? We tipped them off back at the Orkneys. If we'd raced across the Atlantic, we would have caught them entire clan unaware. Clement stepped back, leaning into an oak tree. Okay, boys, I think you can relax now. If you keep telling me the truth, I'll make sure my friend doesn't hurt you. By dawn, we'll be gone, and all of this will seem like a bad dream. Carnes looked back at Clement, who ceased all hostility. Why weren't you boys taken along on vacation? Were you bad? The elder shook his head. No, William and I had piping camp in Halifax in February, so we were taken in by a local family. You were going to learn to play the bagpipes. Dad said the vacation was stupid, but Uncle Junior wanted the whole family to go. So there wasn't any bagpipe instructor where we were going. And where did your family go? Some island in Spain. The younger boy corrected. Madeira. See? Carnes noted, looking at Clement with a fire in his old eyes. These boys had nothing to do with your father's death. At Clement's scoff, Carnes continued. My friend recently lost his father, and we were hunting the men who did it. I'm sure if something happened to your father, you'd want to do the same, wouldn't you? The boys nodded. My friend Roger and I are both from Halifax. We've been tracking these bandits for miles. When we saw your fire, we thought it might be them hiding from the law. What's your father's name? Perhaps I know him from Halifax. Magnus St. Clair. I'm Scott, and this is my brother William Henry. Son of a bitch, Clement thought, thinking of the summers he spent with Magnus Sinclair at Oxford House. The little bastards even look like him. Suddenly, his fingers found their way back to his knife hilt. But then Carnes cleared his throat in a grunt, and Clement let go of the knife and walked back to the rowboat. Chapter 33. Newport, Rhode Island, 1853. Professor Corey Morgan couldn't help but feel a bit disappointed. From the vague reference on Verrazano's map to the occult lore found in the Drummond Library, he knew all about the infamous Newport Tower, the Viking Tower. As soon as he stepped out of the carriage, it seemed almost silly that the five of them had taken the 60-mile trip from Boston. While an impressive stack of stones, the Newport Tower was no taller than a generic windmill back in Scotland, although stripped of all functionality. It was a skeleton of stone that did not inspire awe. Behind him, Sophus Nielsen and Vaktar Forsberg jumped from the carriage, followed by the gloomy Clement and Carnes. Carnes and Clement returned from Nova Scotia angrier than when they'd left, so Morgan knew an adventure would clear the air before getting back in a ship bound for Hudson Bay. My investigation is the only thing keeping the peace right now. Forsberg and Nielsen walked at Morgan's side for stories, which he indulged. This might be the oldest structures in North America, Morgan explained as he walked quickly to the structure. A white picket fence surrounded the area to allow tourists to view but not to enter. When Giovanni Verrazzano passed through here, he spotted it from his ship and labeled it a Norman Tower, which is why many of my colleagues believe it might have been built by early Viking explorers. Vaktar flashed a toothless grin at the notion. Why did they build it? Nielsen asked. If it was indeed built by Vikings, it might have been used as a navigational landmark. If you're interested in exploration, a unique landmark like this, visible from the sea, allows you to know how far south or north you venture on the endless American coast. Who else besides the Vikings would have built it? Sophus pressed. Morgan turned to see Carnes and Clement standing beside him. There's a theory involving a legendary explorer, Prince Henry Sinclair. Is that the same Prince Henry who kidnapped my ancestor? Vaktar asked. Yes, if the story has merit, the Order of Eos used their ancient maps to travel to the lost continent in search of a lost treasure of unspeakable worth. To cross the Atlantic, they followed the routes known by the Nielsen and Forsberg sailors of old. Once they reached the vast continent, neither their guides nor their maps were beneficial anymore. Remember, at this time, no one knew the vastness of America, so creating a navigational landmark here on this sheltered island would have made sense. Some of my peers suggest that the strange design of the building was to make astronomical measurements in conjunction with star maps they held in their possession. They knew the line upon which the treasure should be found, but they had no ability to get there without crossing the continent. We could break through those pickets, Clement offered. The boys nodded and grinned. Morgan shook his head. Oh, we already know where it points. Men have known for countless centuries the general line upon which the treasure would be found, thanks to Stuart's star maps. Morgan turned to Carnes. Oak Island. It lies on what we know as the 44th degree latitude. In those days, they didn't know longitude or latitude, but the Norse sailors understood the stars and where they would rise on the horizon in any given season. That's why the island was raised and oak trees were planted. Carnes repeated the theory back to him. Yes, it would have been a starting point. The natives inhabiting Nova Scotia might have initially seen the Order of Eos as gods, but once one bleeds or catches a cold and dies, the luster soon vanishes. My bet is the explorers went south because it was easier and warmer than staying in Nova Scotia. This tower was most likely built in the early days, both as a landmark and an astronomical center of almost religious purpose. The Order of Eos might don Christianity when it suits them, but their religious beliefs are old, perhaps even older than the religion of the Vikings. Nicolette had figured it out. The men of the dawn began their quest in the days of Atlantis, Thule, Hyperborea, and Noah's flood. So why did you drag us here? Clement snarled. I'm sorry for spoiling your chance at revenge, Morgan said, dodging the answer. If I'd been more discreet back at Orkney Island, the man you seek, this Magnus Sinclair, well, your blade could have drank his blood. But see, that is the problem with the Order of Eos. They've spent generations dedicated to this legend. Unlike us, they are patient and cautious. Get on with it, Clement huffed. What's the point of this stupid tower? It's a monument to the Order of Eos. A tower built along the eastern shore, welcoming the dawn each day. Just like Oak Island, they gave it up centuries ago to continue their quest westward. If they gave up Oak Island, why did we find a few stray Sinclairs still lingering around? Carnes asked. They had a mansion built across from the island. Trust me, they've moved on. They simply honor their heritage, which is why the entire family moved back to their old stronghold on Madeira Island, an old Templar stronghold. Professor? Clement snarled, still upset at not getting to slaughter the two Sinclair boys he find. Why didn't those boys talk about finding Captain Kidd's treasure on Oak Island if Eos gave it up centuries ago? Clement tried to bully him, but Morgan had met plenty of academic bullies in school, so he didn't give the brute a quick answer. If being born into Eos' family tree is worthy of death, then William Drummond Stewart deserves death. Imagine what would have happened if you killed him with the same notion you wanted to kill those boys, Morgan countered. Carnes raised his eyebrows, and Clement lowered his head in submission. The Drummond Library was fascinating, even if the Order of Eos denied William membership. He wasn't the only wild second son in the family. More than a century ago, the Drummond family took root in the New World, in another island, the Bahamas. A second son by the name of Edward Drummond, later known as the pirate Blackbeard, became the mad dog for the Order of Eos, but not before another famous pirate made a name for himself. Captain Kidd, Clement answered after getting his partial answer. Yes, while I am certain of Blackbeard's allegiance to the Order of Eos, bringing several of the lost Templar treasures back to his family in Scotland, the loyalty of Captain Kidd is quite puzzling. At first, it appeared he was hired by Eos allies, but he acted against them. Ultimately, he ended up getting caught in Boston and sent to England, where he was executed. Even after his death, however, his legend lived on. Despite a crowd of thousands in London seeing his execution, rumors grew that he rose from his grave to pilot a ghost ship that tormented the world for decades after his death. It is said he even paid a visit to Oak Island, where he plundered the buried treasure of his betrayers. Nielsen had been sponging it all up and asked, "Why did the two Sinclair boys think they were searching for Captain Kidd's treasure?" Morgan studied the narrow windows and confirmed that they were built to get astronomical reading rather than a view of the bay. If the legendary treasure of the Templar Knights had once been kept on Oak Island, it has long since been moved. In the 1300s, the Templar Knights were on the run, even though they were supported by powerful renegade families like the Sinclairs. Nowhere in Europe would their treasure be safe, so it makes sense that the treasure would be moved to a secure location, like remote Oak Island. In the early 1700s, between Captain Kidd and Blackbeard, the security of the treasure was untenable, and they likely emptied the vault. Or someone stole the treasure, Forsberg savagely muttered. Either way, the vault at Oak Island had served its purpose, Morgan explained. Even so, it remains a monument to Eos, just like this tower is a relic of the past. What kind of treasure was it? Sophus Nielsen returned to Oak Island. The rumors vary. Spanish gold, secret documents, Templar relics, the Holy Grail, and even the lost Ark of the Covenant. What would the Ark of the Covenant be doing on this side of the globe? Carnes asked skeptically. It might surprise you, Morgan answered. From what I gleaned from the Drummond Library, many of the relics go back to ancient times. But like I said, the Great Vault had been emptied for more than a century now, which is why Eos abandoned it rather than leave someone other than two boys to guard it. Clement sighed loudly in frustration, looking at the stone tower for answers. So now what? What is the point? I read all about this tower in my books, and here it stands, still. This tower fits the timeline and functionality as an astronomical tool. It confirms that Eos searched for something deep within the continent at the same latitude as this tower. I must admit that when we began this adventure together, the Order of Eos seemed as real to me as if I was searching for King Arthur's Holy Grail. After you let those Sinclair boys go, I couldn't travel to Oak Island, could I? If those two boys tell their story, and they will, the Order of Eos will know we were here. Eos already knew we were coming, Clement muttered. Yes, but now they know we've arrived. So this might have been my only chance to find some evidence that Prince Henry Sinclair was here a century before Christopher Columbus. Perhaps I'm a fool, but it seems as if the scholars are ignoring any Norse evidence. And who does that serve? Are you saying the Order of Eos is shaping our history books? Karn scoffed. You're blaming Eos scholars for getting fired from your position at the university. Does this look like a windmill to you? Morgan asked Carnes. I don't know what this is, Carnes answered gruffly. I do, and I needed you to see it before we continue on to the next phase of the adventure. Our next phase? Carnes asked. My chance at revenge is over, Clement muttered. Perhaps, but perhaps there is another way we can claim revenge. We could claim the Holy Grail before our enemies grab it. But are we seeking Lapis Exilis or Lapis Elixir? How can I get revenge when the snakes have crawled down into their hole? Are we heading for Madeira Island? Oh no, Morgan responded to Clement, who grunted. That would certainly be what they wanted. We'd be captured or killed quite easily. My point is threefold. First, those boys do not know your identities, do they? So the cover story of Lord Erskine looking to book travel for a hunting expedition to the west still works. Yes, but the whole reason to go west is to kill Delhut, who obviously slithered into a hole like the Sinclairs. You forget that there are other reasons to go west, but you touched upon my second point, Madeira. You just said it'd be suicide to go there. Oh, it is, but the boys told us something about our enemy. From the Orkney Islands to Madeira, the Order of Eos honors its heritage. And once they learned of danger, they went home to places of safety. The Order of Eos is spread far and wide across America, but thanks to Nicolette, we know where they were heading, don't we? If word reaches those out on the frontier, where might they go? Home. Oxford House, Clement muttered. What's Oxford House? Nielsen asked boldly. Carnes took measure of Clement before explaining. Antoine grew up at a trading post on Hudson Bay called Oxford House. He then turned to Morgan. If Magnus Sinclair left for Madeira, it's possible other Sinclairs were out on the frontier and might just now be returning home. He then turned to Clement. You might still get your chance at revenge. So is there treasure at Oxford House? Nielsen blurted out again. Morgan chuckled. Not the Oak Island treasure, I assume. He pointed to the narrow windows and then pointed his arm westward. The earliest Eos explorers crossed the Atlantic and ran into a vast continent here. When they discovered an untamed wilderness due west, they likely changed tactics to find another way around the continent. They went north, Vaktar Forsberg answered knowingly. Yes, and so shall we, Morgan tousled the boy's hair and then herded them all back to the carriage. Thanks to this tower, I know the line upon which the most sacred Eos treasure was expected to be found. What treasure is that? Countless men have wandered out onto the frontier looking for signs of Blue Earth. They believe that vitriol could reveal the resting place of the Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone is at Oxford House? Nielsen asked with a grin. No, but those early Eos sailors would have had to get off their ships and begin exploring by foot. If we don't find any Sinclairs at Oxford House, then we'll turn south and follow the lines set by this tower. Huh, Clement grunted, shaking his head. Nicolette had it all figured out a decade ago. He fooled them all by preparing for another expedition farther west into the Rockies, but he'd already found a place where the earth bleeds blue. I already know where the tower pointed. I've been there. I'll take all of you there, but only after I make the earth bleed red. Then on tomorrow, we'll sail for Oxford House, gentlemen, Morgan said, feeling his heart stirred by hope, and we will find out if Nicolette found the resting place of the Philosopher's Stone. This is the end of Part 5.